Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I am the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. You can hear the hesitancy in my voice. It is, of course, weighed down by anxiety and melancholy and all the kinds of emotions that swirl around those guys. It is now Thursday night, after 2 days after the election, and I'm sure you all know that not only was the election not a blowout for Biden, but it is up in the air. Not that I was a huge fan of his anyway, and that's an understatement, but I find the alternative of 4 more years of Trump to be untenable. But interestingly enough, all of these topics get touched on without us actually talking about any of this shit today. So after this sentence is over, I'm not going to be talking about politics, and my guest is not going to be talking about politics, so you can breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief. Sorry, I have not slept in, I would say, 4 weeks, something like that. But I am really excited about today's episode because this is Diane Cluck, and I have just absolutely loved her music for a long time. If you don't know who Diane is, let me tell you her bio. Originally from Lancaster, PA, Diane began playing music in grade school. She started to perform publicly in New York in the early 2000s. Publicly, like, you know, obviously she had a band in high school, but I mean for real. She started to perform publicly in New York in the early 2000s in the same Lower East Side folk scene that included Jeffrey Lewis, Regina Spektor, and Kimya Dawson. And since then has recorded and released over a dozen albums and compilations. Her latest, Commonwealth, was just released in June, and it's wonderful. I'm actually going to play a song from it in case you don't know who Diane is or you don't know her music. I'll play a song before we get into the interview, just so you have some context. But I first heard Diane's album. I don't know how I came across it, but I first heard her album, Ova Nil, which was, I think in 2004, 2005. And just, like I said before, just absolutely fell in love with her music. And this, you know, what I've been doing in quarantine is recording a bunch of interviews over Zoom and mostly releasing them in chronological order that I tape them, unless we end up talking about something that happens to be in the zeitgeist, like Thurston Moore, which was last week's episode. You know, that was taped pretty recently, and In the Queue would have been released, you know, a month or two from now. But, you know, the things we were talking about seemed to be pretty timely, so I thought, let's put it out now. And Diane's interview, you know, when we did it back in, I think, July, somewhere around there, somewhere in the mid to late summer, it was a really lovely talk, but it didn't seem timely, so it entered the queue. And it's by complete coincidence that it comes out this week. Because what we talk about a lot is growing up in Pennsylvania. She grew up in Lancaster, like I said. I'm from Reading. And it's the culture of the state is pretty interesting. And as we say in this episode, it's kind of a microcosm of America. And it's now one of the battleground states that could decide the election. So I thought it was really interesting that we talk about it. And not only that, but I think the experience Diane's parents had of the 20th into the 21st century and what's happened to them explains a lot. Now, if you're wondering how the fuck did Biden, and okay, well, for one more minute, we'll talk about this shit, but how the fuck did Biden and the Democratic establishment fuck this up so badly to the point where it's now a toss-up? Whether it is Biden, a, you know, pretty standard middle-of-the-road neoliberal Democrat versus an absolute disgusting fascist. I don't have to go into what kind of person Trump is. You all know. I don't think anyone who listens to the show is a fan of his or the Republicans. But number one, I'm curious about the distorting effect of the Electoral College and the distorting effect of voter suppression, which we know was fairly massive. But beyond that, there is both the fact that white supremacy is suffused in every molecule of this country. But I don't think that explains everything. And I think some of the missing pieces we talk about in today's episode completely by accident. Again, we're just talking about Pennsylvania. We're not linking this to anything political, but just, the kinds of the way in which the pillars of Diane's parents' life were all kind of knocked down over the last 30, 40 years, leaving them bereft, leaving them with... There's this blog I read called After the Future, and I've mentioned it on the show a couple times before, but it's written by a man who has I'm not sure what he actually does, but he got a advanced degree in divinity, I think from Yale, and he has a pretty deep, both theological and philosophical well of knowledge, and something he talks about a lot in his blog is how in the 20th century kind of common culture fell away for many different reasons. I don't think he puts a value judgment on it, but common culture fell away, and faith kind of receded a lot, and both those things gave people something to hold on to, and without it they are what he calls ontologically dizzy, or they suffer from ontological dizziness. They don't have anything to hold on to, and so they grasp at stuff, and sometimes the things they grasp at are very regressive, such as right-wing politics. So I think that explains a lot of stuff too, is kind of that ontological dizziness of being in this, of a lot of people, a lot of us being in this paradigm shift that we're in right now over the last, and by now I mean, 50, 60, 70, 80 years, where we're kind of going through another Copernican revolution type of shift. I don't know where we're going, but, and I think that's the problem. None of us really know where we're going. None of us can articulate a positive vision of the future, and there's nothing to work towards, so we're all kind of just lost. And that's, I think, causing a lot of the chaos of this time, at least philosophically. That's the spirit that undergirds everything. So anyway, all of that, it comes from some stories about Pennsylvania and about Diane's parents. So, but I think it kind of helps give a better picture of where we are at the moment. Anyway, if this is your first time listening to Beginnings, first of all, usually these introductions are nowhere near this long. This is not Marin. This is not WTF. Usually get in and get out into the interview. But thanks to the election, I'm in a pontificating mood. But if this is your first time listening to Beginnings and you want to check out other episodes, they're all there on Spotify. They're all there at beginnings.libsyn.com. And of course, the last 100 are on whatever podcast app you use. Now, you can wade through the last 10 years of episodes if you want. I could suggest some episodes. I like doing that in these in these intros. If I've talked to tons of people from lots of different artistic backgrounds, but if you are someone who just wants to hear interviews with musicians, I've talked to the women behind The Blow, Saint Lennox, Colleen Green, Anna Waronker of That Dog, Sadie Dupuis from Speedy Ortiz, Dane Wareham of Luna and Galaxy 500, Inara George, that was good, Sam Prekop, Owen Pallett, tons of other people. So check out those episodes. Oh, Mitski, that was a good one. Sorry, I'm just looking at the list here. If you like what you hear and you want to subscribe to the show, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon, Google, all the tech places that have podcast platforms. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckman. Some amazing stuff coming up. I've been doing some really great interviews in quarantine. Just talked to Bob Nastanovich from Pavement, Bobby Previtt, that was wonderful, Tobin Sprout from Guided by Voices, Ian Mackay, that's coming up soon. And, next week is Steve Conrad, who created the show Patriot, which you can see on Amazon Prime, and it's one of my favorite things that's come out in a long time. So, stay tuned. Get some sleep if you can. Practice self-care. And right now, I'm going to play the first song off of Diane's new album, Commonwealth. It is called The Power of Allowing and Receiving. It's one of my favorite songs she's ever done. So check it out. And then right after that, my talk with Diane Cluck.
As I lay bathing in a blazing mountain heat, no, there was nothing between the sun and me except a shadow of an incidental bird. It kept on circling to ensure I wasn't hurt. It hung in the sky and kept me in its shade. Once I'd gone inside, on my skin I found its shape in pale relief. Now I am believing in the power of allowing and receiving. Riches from the hands that long to share their gold. If you just loosen up that old white knuckle hold, they bind your burdens closer than you might would guess. Just set them down now and dance around, sung out to the sky, a song from balled up roots you're bound to catch.
Besides impending fascism, the pandemic, California is on fire. We had to take our dog in for surgery on Tuesday. Just very minor, but it's just like it's our first dog, and we rescued her last year, and it's just been we don't know like dog language. We don't know how to, if this is bad. Like she was panting a little bit yesterday, and we were like freaking out for about a half hour, and then it stopped, and we're like, oh,
Yeah, you just don't know. It's like, yeah. There's so many unknowns. This dog thing's just an extra unknown, I suppose, huh?
yeah. Do you have
Yeah.
pets? Did you have pets growing up? Are you a pet
I
person?
I love dogs. I grew up with Great Danes. I don't have a dog because I haven't wanted the responsibility. Especially before now when I was traveling a lot. That just didn't seem like a good idea. And then also being home and like taking them out or having to be home every so many hours and maybe fence in the yard, all that kind of thing, living by a busy road. No.
Yeah, no, it's the exact same
Yeah.
thing. Like, we don't want children. So we thought, well, we have cats and we have, and so we got this dog. We're like, that's the most responsibility we want. But it's more responsibility than we
It's a
thought.
lot. Thank you for saying that because so many people I know are getting dogs now because of their like loneliness or whatever. And I'm enjoying their dogs and feeling a little like, oh, I'm so lucky I get to go over just hang out with your dog and then I go home. I don't have to get up at 6 in the morning with your dog. And that's actually probably just where I want to be.
Yeah. So you're with dogs the way we are with children, where
Yeah.
we're like, we'll visit our friends' kids for an afternoon, and that's it. We're happy with that.
I could
I
be
don't-
like a dog aunt. I could dog sit for a weekend. I could dog sit for a weekend and enjoy that and be
Yeah.
willing to do that, but I don't need my own dog.
Besides touring, do you travel a lot?
No, nope, I don't actually. That's not really touring was a lot of my traveling. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I'm just thinking about also like the having pets. As much as we can leave them with other people, it hurts my heart to do that. And so
Mhm.
it has limited the travel that we
Yeah.
can undertake.
I mean, growing up with dogs, I remember when we would go to the beach for a week in the summer. That was like our main family vacation. And we came back and the dog was incredibly ecstatically happy to see us. And I would feel really sorry for her because it made me feel that for that whole week, she'd been thinking like, where are they? This is my new life. I miss them. Like what happened to me? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Look, life is heartbreaking in general, I find. I find that
yes.
there's a baseline melancholy to existence, and that's just what life seems to be. But like those extra little things that just like grab at you, I'm like, I don't know how to deal with them. I mean, I don't know how to process emotions in general. I don't know how to feel joy without. I don't know how to feel joy. Period. There's no qualifier to there. It happens in my body, and then I'm just like, what do I do with this feeling? Now, so here's a question. You're from Lancaster.
Yes. You're from Reading.
I'm from Reading.
Yeah. Amazing.
And I was really excited. But besides being an absolute fan of your music since, I don't know, 2005, almost like a decade and a half now, since I first heard Ovanil. I don't know how to pronounce it. Ovanil.
You got it. Second.
Yeah. I'm very excited to talk to other people from Pennsylvania because I'm curious if the geography of the state, if the place that you grew up has affected you in the same way it affected me, or if the way that I am is purely a product of my friends and family.
It's a really great topic to jump into. I feel that landscape affected me for sure. And I don't know if you know the record I made after Ovanil, Countless Times has a song called Sylvania. Maybe you know that one. I think there's this human tendency to kind of nostalgize. How do you say?
Yeah,
Make it nostalgize. The previous period in life. Like as a teenager, I remember thinking back to being 5 and thinking, oh wow, I'm like so different and what it was like when I was 5. And then I think there was a period when I moved away from Pennsylvania and I found myself really
I'm just like into this word now, nostalgizing the cornfields and the graveyards and the flatness and the plainness and the multiple sects of various fundamental Christian religions that were everywhere that affected the culture and the ways of thinking and the ways of expressing and dressing and the furniture and the houses and all that. So there's like a plainness. Yeah, that so what's your experience of the whole Reading, Lancaster area?
I mean, this is my hypothesis, and I don't know if it's backed up by anything more than anecdotal data, but I think that because of the kind of plainness of Pennsylvania and the austerity of the culture, that I didn't learn how to express my emotions very well. And that it took a long time for me to learn how to deal with them. That's why I said, like, I don't know how to process joy. Like, I could feel joy. Like, I'm not dead inside. But once it happens, I'm like, what do I do with this now? Any kind of like, obviously now I'm an adult and I've learned how to be better. And I've gone through therapy and those kinds of things. But I think the first, decade or two of my life was definitely kind of like a moving inwards and staying inward in my body, as opposed to expressing outward these feelings in me. And I'm also, as someone who also makes art, it took me a while to get good at making things, at writing scripts or writing characters or performing because of this stuff. But that's just, I also had like parents who, they were raised by, their parents were coming of age in the 40s and 30s and 40s. And when, you weren't supposed to express emotions really, or like to be a man.
Yeah, that was a real key for me when I heard someone speak. It was actually at a women's herbal conference about 15 years ago. And that was a real key piece for me, understanding that the men of that era, what they were expected to be carrying, and also people coming out of the war, coming home, coming out of the war, and then no culture for expressing emotion, then kind of having children of their own, and then we're those people's children. It takes some time to shake out, and I've definitely found that that's true for me, and I don't think it's especially special. I think it is a generational thing. I do think the region we're talking about has some of that, but I have to wonder how much of that is America too.
Yeah. I mean, Pennsylvania as a microcosm of America at large,
and the deep secrets and the wounding, and just understanding more about our country's history and trauma in the body and how we hold things. I mean, dancing has become a huge part of my life, and that's helped me process emotions. I resonate with what you're saying about not knowing how to. Is there a correct way? I don't know that there is, but just how to get them moving through, how to let them move through.
Yes.
How to let them keep on moving and not like pile them up in a stockpile, like hoarding them in some back stock room or something. Like,
yes.
When am I going to be safe enough to pull this out and look at it when I don't freak anybody else out or myself? And when I think a lot of my artistic life has been about trying to make relatively safe spaces for myself to explore the difficult things. So I even like moved across the country once, about 12 years ago, to where I like didn't know anybody, because I really just needed that space to be able to unpack my stuff, and I didn't want to hurt anybody. Like, I just needed to be able to do it, and I didn't know what it was going to look like. So I moved to Georgia for a couple of years, and my understanding of that period now is that that's what I was doing. I needed to just try to get into some deeper things, and I didn't know how, because also we don't have a great culture. In my feeling of it, we don't have a great culture for mental health here either, one that feels safe or very varied either. It's like drugs, or therapies is can be wonderful, like talking to someone can be wonderful, but I had a really clear picture for me that I had no interest in taking any sort of pharmaceuticals for mood or anything like that. So I just needed to let it come out and see what it was, and music's of course been super helpful with that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very linear, I would say reductive kind of question. and also probably kind of dumb. But is music? Does that play does beginning to play music like when you were younger? Did that have any? What's the word I'm looking for? Was it in any way an attempt to express these things that you couldn't express otherwise?
Absolutely.
Oh,
The thing is, I started taking piano lessons when I was 7, and I actually had a real connection to piano right away. Like when I first met a piano, I was like, "Wow, what's that? Who are you? I like you." I was really had a, like I call it like a crush on piano, and it made me feel like shy and nervous and excited. And there was one in my kindergarten classroom, so I would play it. And I felt an immediate connection to it. But then when I started taking lessons, I felt myself distanced from that for many years. Like the format of traditional lessons was just not inspiring that in me. And my teacher was somebody kind of the county that I lived in, like very. It was kind of about competing. You have to hit marks with the music. And then by the time I was a teenager, I had a teacher who helped me learn how to sing out a melody and that kind of thing, and that was helpful. But until I started writing music myself, I didn't experience that feeling of that it helped me move through emotions that much. Although I would get sort of bowled over by Chopin as a teenager. It's so moody. It's so it's like moody pop songs, like Chopin's like I don't, yeah. So I would feel like big swells of emotion through that, and always heard music in my head, but until I started kind of pulling it out on my own and making my own stuff, I don't feel like it necessarily helped dig into the emotional content. I went through a theater phase. I think I turned to theater actually as a teenager as a way of expressing emotion and kind of getting out of what felt like the suburban container that was so limiting. And I knew it was, but it was all I knew in this life. I was just like, this is going to the mall, like these things that people do. And I felt this unrest and this stuff. And somehow theater and reading were ways of exploring the world that would be available to me once I left home, I guess, or up for me to explore on my own. Yeah.
Yes. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. Were you a teenager in the 80s or the 90s?
In the 80s.
In the 80s. Because
I mean, actually both. I mean, spanning both. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're around the same age. And I just like that time felt so like I never rebelled. I was like a good kid, but like I definitely, because I didn't rebel, I had a lot of anger inside because I felt limited by the suburban area I was in. And part of me knew there was more, but I didn't know what more there was. I just knew I wanted something else. And it just made me angry all the time.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I remember having this episode, I could call it, in college where my friends and I were talking, and I had this orange in my hand that I was peeling to eat, and I got really upset and I just threw this orange like splat on the window, and my friend stopped talking, and my friend looked at me, he's like, "What was that about?" And I said something like, "I'm just so, and he said, "So you had to throw that you had to throw that food?" But it was like that was okay to me. Like I just had to get it out. Yeah. Yeah. It's taken a long time, and having other people reflect back to me how my emotions were coming out before I started to finally understand that there were other ways, and also how they were affecting other people. To be honest, it's not really that fun to say, but that's true.
Oh no, I was, because I also had friends who expressed their anger, and so I thought it was okay to express your anger. And I remember if I got angry, I just remember one time I kicked a small waste bin in my room, or I when I had been dating this woman on and off for the first 2 years of college, and when it was just finally over, I remember this is dumb to explain, or this is difficult to explain. You know those old robots from the 80s that people would buy? Like, it basically could do it would have a remote control, and you could it would bring you a drink if you put a soda in its claw in the kitchen. You could use the remote control to bring. It was very impractical.
From like Sharper Image or something like this.
Yes, something like that. I think in the first season of Glow, on that Netflix show, the rich kid who funds the wrestling, he has a giant version of this kind of robot. Anyway, I had found one at Goodwill for like $10. It wasn't working. And I was like, oh, this is cool to have in my room. I remember just like, I was alone. So this wasn't in front of another person, but like she had left. We broke up. This is just it. And I like picked it up and I smashed it into the ground and like shattered it basically. And that was like kind of this moment where I'm like, maybe this is not the correct way to express things. Maybe there are healthier ways to start expressing my emotions than smashing things or kicking something.
Yep. Sometimes it takes that kind of moment.
Yeah. A kind of like the clarity of that. But so yeah. And therapy was not like, especially Pennsylvania 80s and the 90s. I don't know about now, but like when I was growing up, you went to therapy if you were like court ordered to go to therapy. No one casually went to therapy.
Oh yeah, I didn't really know that was even an option or things that like your average person would do until like, I don't know, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I always heard about, I tried it once in New York, and then I was just resentful of how expensive it was. Honestly, I thought, I think I need this and I think I can't pay for this right now. So until I moved to Charlottesville, and there's a really amazing sliding scale place available here for women, unfortunately only, which makes that's nice, but it would be nice if it was available to everyone. I wasn't able to avail myself of that.
So so tell me, what was the Lancaster like of your youth? Like, is there some experience you had or some story that like typifies it, or just what was it like growing up there?
I grew up in an older suburb, built in the 50s, like Cold War era ranch style houses with the big picture window. And what I've heard about those kind of houses and that architecture is it's about being able to see into the nuclear family and see what everybody was up to in the evenings. Like you can see, is the family there? Are they doing the right things? Are they like all sitting around the TV? You know, can you see in these picture windows? So it was like an older suburb where most of the original owners were then older folks. So we had a lot of older folks, but then like they would pass on and young families would move in. So there was also people with kids there, and the suburb was ringed by cornfields. So we did play a lot in the cornfield behind our house. And that was, that made a big impression on me. It was like this little wonderland kind of behind us. We would go in after the threshers would pass and harvest the corn that had been left behind. Like my sisters and I would go pick up the feed corn, and we'd thumb it off into these coffee cans and then feed squirrels in the winter. And we had enough of a yard that we had a forsythia cave, and we had a maple tree we liked to climb. So there was a lot of outdoor time, and the people didn't have fences like they do now, and they also let their kids run. So there were just kids outside doing stuff. I just remember, like, you know, someone would get a lighter and be burning stuff, or you just have somebody on tetherball invite you to come play in the backyard, or there would be just playing in the street because there weren't a whole lot of cars going through the neighborhood. And I delivered papers one summer when I was 12, or for a year when I was 12. And I really liked kind of getting close to see what other people's houses were like how other people were living throughout the neighborhood, just getting to kind of wander and that sort of thing. But it was a very, I guess in some ways it was that ideal American childhood that they try to convey in like propaganda sort of thing. I mean, we went to church every Sunday, went to Catholic church. Yeah, you know, I was expected to get good grades, that kind of thing.
I mean, when did it start to feel off for you? When did that kind of, because I think it hit me at some point in my like mid-teens, maybe, that there was something off. I couldn't articulate what that was, but it just felt wrong. Not bad, but wrong.
I didn't feel wrong, but I felt like there was this dark urgency inside that was just antsy to get out of this thing out of this container, the word I used before. And that was early teens for sure. Yeah, early teens. I started playing in my first band when I was 14 or 15, and it was just boys and me. I was like the keyboard player with the long hair over her face, like in gloves, kind of in the background. But that sort of took me out into like the Chameleon Club. Did you know that place?
Yeah, I saw the Jesus
there,
Lizard there once.
Yeah, they played there a lot. Well, there's the Lizard Lounge was also the name of the downstairs place. But like playing fire hall shows and playing in little clubs, it kind of got me out a little bit to with slightly older friends. Having older friends always, kind of gives you, at that age especially, somebody at 3 or 4 years older feels like a different world.
Were you, like, what was your family like?
I have 2 younger sisters. My family was a football family, a Penn State football family. In fact, my dad has not missed a home game in 54 years or something like this. And this year, now that the season's canceled, will be the first time that he's like, well, I guess it's canceled, so he's not missing the games. Mm-hmm. It's been, my family would go up for the tailgating and the football games, and I never felt like part of that. I mean, that always like, I'm part of this family that I got dropped into. This is weird. I'm going to football games. But actually, I learned some things about football, and I love that they love that. It was just kind of almost like it was a family joke that I was the weirdo, and that was that was kind of clear from the beginning.
I mean, do you think it's just like a quirk of like your biology? I don't know, because like I was also the weirdo in my family. I am still the weirdo in my family. It's a stigma that's I still have not gotten over in some way. They don't even understand what I do now.
Honestly, at this point, I don't mind, though. It was really difficult for me for a long time because it just kind of imprinted this outsider feeling on me at an early age that was hard to get through sometimes. It wasn't always a healthy thing to carry into the world. But I understood as I matured that sometimes you can be the outsider, and once you get strong in yourself, you can go to another place and have the strength to like set up that outside thing that is then can attract other people that have that interest. So even if you're in the minority for that interest, at some point, if you can develop that sense of self-confidence, it doesn't really, like I used to feel put upon by being different and being in this sort of mainstream existence that didn't feel like it fit my inner values. I don't feel that anymore. I actually feel pretty happy almost anywhere. And I think that's had a lot to do with like my inner growth. And I actually, I don't even feel like a weirdo in my family anymore. I feel like I'm just holding down that part of the family, the art, the person who's self-employed and being an artist, and that's an important ingredient in the family. And as I've, not budged from being myself for so long, it's like we all kind of come to understand each other more, and I feel valued in that way. And I've just spent time like asking more questions of them to understand their values. And man, sometimes talking at the stream can be like, I really lose my train. It's not my strength. I have to say singing is a lot easier for me than talking. I had a thing I wanted to express. Let me see if I can catch it. Here it is. I grew up, this is a lot about where I grew up and how I grew up. People gave allegiance to things like the company they worked for, the church they went to, the college they went to. And over my lifetime, I've watched those things get kicked apart. Like I watched my dad be fired by that company he was totally loyal to for decades, like 3 decades. They downsized, they kicked him out. That was super demoralizing. And then I watched like the whole Penn State football thing happen some years back with the Jerry Sandusky stuff. That was like, Joe Paterno was like the patron saint of, Penn State football in our family. So I watched like that notch, like that get ratcheted down a notch. And then also the Catholic Church, like, it's just like, I think I was born really questioning. I was one of those people, like there's a lot of us, some of us feel pretty comfortable in the scene that we're put in, and then some of us question it. And I was always questioning. And then I started seeing some of these things fall apart that my family structure was really built on. But at this point, I think when I was a teenager, I would have felt more of this dark, like yeah, you know, that thing. Like I would have felt some kind of vindication, and I actually feel much more like compassion for what it might feel like to put your faith in something that doesn't care about you. And also, I'll say with like for the government too. It's like our family was. I came from a family of, from what I can tell, because it wasn't always discussed, but feels like a Republican family. And to kind of see, and people that were, you know, in support of the military, and some of that had to do with what we were saying earlier. You know, if you have family members who were older and in the military and served at places like Normandy or whatever, you have this family loyalty to respecting their lineage as being part of the military.
Yeah.
And then sort of seeing where like when you realize like none of it cares about you, I kind of watch what that transition or transformation. It's like, kind of like observing what that does to somebody, and I simply feel, I don't know, it does a lot of emotional things to me inside. I just want all of us to feel like we belong or like we're connected, and I just don't see those. I never saw those structures as being the things that were going to do it for me. I think I've always been one of those people that is seeking that inside, but I also feel it. I feel it deeply. I feel like a connection with everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I think that also it wasn't just Pennsylvania. It wasn't just the geography of Pennsylvania.
No.
It was also like I was born in such a way that I had my antenna up all the time, and it's painful to have your antenna up all the time because you're constantly empathizing with everyone. And if you don't know, if you're not aware, or you maybe not aware of emotions, but if you don't know how to like handle them, you certainly don't know how to build boundaries, or you don't know how to, you know, something I'm doing now is, you know, for the longest time I had, I don't know, not anger so much, but like resentment maybe that my parents did regard me as being like the weird one, in quotes for the listener. And then I'm talking to my therapist. I got a new therapist when we moved to Los Angeles, and she's like, "Yes, get over it. It's not a big, it's not a big deal." And I'm like, "Well, I don't." I'm like, "That's it, you know." I hear what you're saying. You know, it's not like they've done any. You know, they're not bad people. They never abused me, and they you know, we have a fairly fine relationship. And she's like, and I'm like, but how do you? Get over it to me is like this physical metaphor, right? How do you actually do that? She's like, well, you just sit with the bad feelings instead of discharging the bad feelings immediately by, like you have, like I have a phone call with my parents, and you know, they're like, you know, oh, that's a weird idea for say I'm pitching a TV show, and they're like, oh, that's a weird idea. And then I start to like feel resentment inside. My therapist is like, well, just sit with that feeling and just get used to it so that, you know, and that's how you'll do it, instead of immediately like you feel a bad feeling and then you go on Twitter or Instagram to try to ignore it. But as a child, I didn't have any of this awareness, right? I didn't have any of these. I didn't know how you dealt with any of this stuff. And so my antenna was constantly up, and it was constantly... I didn't know. I think part of it was like I didn't know how to deal with other people's emotions, not only my own, if that makes any kind of sense. And I wonder if you were kind of the same way.
I will say our family wasn't good at unpacking emotional content. Like our family was very okay with anger. It was really a currency that we were free to trade in my family.
Yep.
And only when I started bringing some friends home for holidays, they'd be like, wow, like the way so-and-so and so-and-so talk to each other, I really needed to have that reflected from outside, because I knew we all loved each other. I know we all love each other.
Right.
But the way that we would sort of holler at each other is, I didn't understand that all families don't do that. And our family actually is been shifting quite a bit, I think, because my sisters and I have all gone different directions with that form of communication. I think we are really have our eyes on that, especially as my sisters have been having children, and we want to be able to discuss sensitive things without jumping to anger when it becomes uncomfortable. And that was really my family just didn't have the skills. They weren't skilled in that way.
Yeah.
And then we are developing the skills in this generation, and I'm really glad about that. It's shifting a lot. It just makes me understand how much closeness there actually is between us. When people can get past being reactive, it's just opens up everything. But you have to develop it. I think, like, developing it in myself, whereas like the kind of remark that would have made any of us fly off the handle in the past, like if it just lands and it becomes something funny or something ignored or something that you understand that this is the way this person communicates, it just doesn't mean, it doesn't have the same stickiness, the same glue that it used to. And there's been a shift there.
The other thing that you were saying that really kind of resonated with me was our parents' generation is the first generation, at least maybe of the 20th century, I don't know about the past, but to like really be betrayed by the culture that they invested their egos in.
Yeah, it's I hear a lot of people, being upset at like old white men, but I actually know these old white men, some of them are my family, and I hear that. I can hear all the sides. That's the thing. You can just like you're saying about having your antenna up. I hear all the sides. I hear that the people that were able to kind of invest and even sometimes develop like footholds in this culture that where like the money was flowing in a certain way at a certain time with certain jobs, they don't understand what other people go through, that they couldn't build the same kind of empire for themselves, or that they don't actually want to. And can be like a resentment that is changing and shifting. It's being opened up to more people. They're losing what they had, or things like the stock market are shifting. Like all I can say is I can see how for anyone we become accustomed to a certain life rules or lifestyle, and there's always a sense of loss when it shifts and it's not as favorable to you, and that's the way we humans are, And so I kind of just kind of like observing everyone and seeing how this shift is hard for people.
Yeah.
For everyone in different ways and on different levels. Some more in the immediate survival sense, some on the ego sense. It's and like kind of across that spectrum, not making a judgment that suffering on the ego spectrum is more or less suffering than suffering on the survival spectrum. Just kind of like seeing that everyone's really uncomfortable in these shifts, and like just accepting that that's valid for everybody,
Yeah. Well, it's really difficult. Our country went through a paradigm shift in the 1970s, and it didn't start, the ripples of that didn't start moving outwards until the next couple decades, until eventually the whole financial system kind of falls apart in 2008. But I was just watching this documentary by this British documentarian, Adam Curtis. He's fantastic. He's maybe one of my favorite I was going to say documentarians, but he's really an artist. The way he puts these things together, I highly recommend him if you've never seen it. But there's this one that he did, I don't know how long ago, maybe like 20 years or so, called the Mayfair Set. And it basically traces each episode. Like one is like about the 50s. The next one's about the 60s. Uh-oh, my cat. One's about the 50s, the next one's about the 60s into the 70s. And each one is like how in those decades, the old business order was wiped away by this kind of like new business order. And the new business order was psychopathic and only interested in the collection of money. And how in each of these decades, I'm only up to the third one, which is the 80s, how in each of these time periods, that the old order being undermined by this new kind of psychopathic order just destroys culture. And the real like kind of crunch period, is like maybe 1975 when New York City goes bankrupt. And that's really like the start of everything kind of falling apart. And you only know this in retrospect, right? You only kind of see this in retrospect. And then like my dad worked for this computer company and worked there for, 15 years maybe. And then the boss kind of ran into the ground, and my dad had to figure out in his early 40s what he wanted to do with his life, because the company that he had dedicated, a lot of his adult life to just fell apart. And I wonder if that's, the same thing you were witnessing too, is kind of this old order falling apart in front of you. And you just see it by like seeing your family members kind of like not understand the world anymore.
Yeah, for sure. My dad actually took, he thought he was going to take early retirement because this happened to him in his late 50s or maybe almost 60, which is not an easy time to either start a fresh job or decide to retire. It was kind of like 50-50. But I think it really knocked him on his butt for a while. And he actually spent a year and a half or 2 years learning to play the piano, for one thing, which was astonishing. He threw himself into piano. And the other thing is he started researching his family history around his dad, who had died when he was in his 20s. My father's father passed away when when I was born, basically, and my dad was in his 20s. So there was a lot missing for him there, and he started interviewing my grandfather's old war buddies and kind of trying to understand, I think, more of his own growing up picture, which was, I saw a real transformation in my father's emotional availability, I think, after that firing situation, and then also maybe spending some time starting from the bottom at something like piano, and then like learning more about his family history. Yeah.
What do you think he learned that kind of made him or gave him some peace?
He went on a little tour of all the places that his father had been to in battle. And I know that his father was on the beach at Normandy, probably killed people. That's the thing. Like, you have family members who go off and murder people in Europe and come home, and then they're at their kids' birthday parties. And how do they merge those experiences? And in that time, I don't think they were. I mean, there was no, like, we're talking about how far on the idea of growing up as kids in the 80s, 90s, how far on the idea of therapy was. Like, it's not like these people going through truly harrowing life and death experiences came home and received anything like that. They were congratulated and awarded, and there's this, things in my parents' house that are framed, like medals and things that were my grandfather's, and a picture of his battalion, stuff like that. But I don't know. I guess I don't envy the journey of some men in this country having to learn how to process emotions. It's easier for women, I would say, or it has been made easier for women. It's not on a case by case basis, but like it has been made easier in the culture for women to feel that they can fall apart and process the world at an emotional level, I think.
But did you find that even for you, that was like, for me growing up, I think, witnessing around me, I think it's not like anyone would say anything to you if you were emotional, but you could tell that people were around you were uncomfortable.
Oh, I was always getting, you're so dramatic. You're so dramatic. But I felt things dramatic. Like, I was like the kid that would cry if we went to the zoo, and I was like, I can't go to the zoo. There's tigers in cages. And so, like, the family would go to the zoo, and I'd stay in the parking lot. It was like it was like a thing. I could just, like, I was that kid. Yeah. I'm just looking out the window right now. It started raining. Like I said, talking can be, it's hard for me to, I don't know where to put my focus sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Well, we were talking to our couples therapist earlier today, and he's saying, we're not built for this to be the mode of connecting with other people.
Yeah, a lot more space is normal. I think, the Zoom kind of thing sort of push the space to the side, and there's an onus to fill the space or have really important or really interesting or really true or really right things to say. I mean, I'm letting go of that because this is going to be what it is, but it's Yeah, I'm just looking at the rain. And like in a conversation at my house, we might just be both looking out at the rain right now. It's truly beautiful. It's midday, the sky has gone dark, and there's a lot of bamboo growing on my block. So it's like this dark leafy green, and it's kind of more compelling than anything I can imagine saying right now.
No, but I mean, like, you know, when you say that, it does make me think back to what I did treasure about growing up in Pennsylvania, especially in kind of like, I was in like the suburbs of Reading, and it was a pretty, like, I don't know, it ran the gamut from, I would say, working class to mostly middle class with a couple like upper middle class areas, but mostly it was working class and middle class, and somewhat rural. Like for Reading, it still kind of like baffles me, but you could go from like rural farmland to the inner city within 25 minutes. And you had this kind of like strata all together very close. And I do appreciate how, you know, I could go sit on my parents' porch and read on a Sunday afternoon and have the rain, you know, the drizzle outside, and hear the insects in the trees around us, and still kind of have a city-ish area I could go to if I wanted to. I mean, I think that's somewhat unique. I don't know if Lancaster is similar. I mean, you talked about being in nature earlier, and then you also had the Chameleon Club right there. So
it's a 15-minute drive. It sounds like a lot like what you're saying. And I did love the summers there. Loved the insect noises and the lightning bugs and the humidity in the summer nights and playing outside until it got dark, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like there is this kind of, I don't want to paint it all as this kind of like drab suburban. I mean, I didn't know that before, but I love finding out that, you know, the giant picture windows are just part of a kind of surveillance state type reinforcement of, I don't know, suburban bourgeois values.
Yeah.
But it's not all that. There was also there was also beautiful, you know, being part of nature, right? You know, and having it right there.
Yeah, those picture windows were great. I mean, they let you see out to quite a bit, and we would spend a lot of time sitting in that window too. It's it goes both ways, you know.
Mm-hmm. But like you also said earlier, you know, that there were a lot of I don't know. I can't remember exactly what you said, but there were evangelical areas around where you grew up, or because one of the things I remember about like going around Lancaster. I don't know if this is what you talked about, but you know, there's a lot of Amish areas there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of Mennonite too, and some of the stricter orders of Mennonite were almost like getting in closer to what the Amish lifestyle was. Like, I don't know if this is considered an okay way to say this. It may be not, so my apologies to any Mennonite folks, but if I'm misspeaking. But we used to call them black bumper Mennonites, and part of it was that they didn't want any flash. So they had cars, but they would paint the bumpers of their cars black, so there was no chrome, you know. And like we had a math teacher, Mr. Stoner, who was Mennonite. He dressed very plainly, almost like an Amish person. And I do believe that emphasis on plainness has, and actually in a good way, it's influenced me. Like, I like sturdiness, I like craft. I like that more than flash. I really enjoy in writing songs, I want them to be well built. And I don't love excessive ornamentation when I'm making things myself. I kind of look for what's the more intrinsic, like, necessary components of making a song. And I think some of that comes from growing up in a place that was aesthetically very plain and kind of close to the land in that way. It was an agricultural community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when you were growing up, did that, I grew up, I'm Jewish, and I just knew that where I was very Christian. and I didn't know anything about it. I had friends who were Catholic and went to CCD, but I didn't really understand what that meant. I just knew that I kind of was an outsider and I was kind of seen as an outsider, but I didn't understand what Christian or evangelical culture was. I didn't understand. There were a lot of also hate groups, especially
there were
around us.
There were absolutely. I remember in my first fire hall shows that I was playing in as a young teenager, my bandmates and I were like, let's get out of here, because there were skinheads of the type that were racist. I know not all skinheads are racist, but there were racist skinhead folks in some of the bands, and we were shocked. We just kind of picked up on the vibe, and we're like, we're out of here. We also, I remember this very strange experience, and it might have been somewhere like Reading. It was close to Lancaster, but we had to drive a bit, and it was just when only some of my friends had started driving. So we were probably some of us were 15, some of us were 16, 17. But we went on this Halloween hike, and we all, we'd seen it in the newspaper, it was before the internet. So we saw this advertisement for a Halloween hike to historical places. So we showed up for this hike, maybe 5 or 6 of us. And it was very strange. It was like a guy in a white robe, not wearing a hood, but in some kind of white robe. And he's kind of looking at us like, you're here for the hike? And we're like, yeah. He took Polaroids of all of us. And then this kind of group gathered. We started kind of going on this walk. But the vibe was so off that actually we had some parents who were supposed to be picking us up later, but we actually, all of us piled into the one car of the one kid who could drive, and we got out of there because it had a Klan vibe. And I don't know what we stumbled into, if it was like this is for people who know that this is actually a different thing kind of thing. But we felt like we were being, they were really focusing on my Asian friends in this group. And it was just something really sinister and off. And so that was always kind of around. I felt that around. I also learned that one of my relatives' employers had there was a local KKK rally, had the rally on their front lawn. And this was something I felt like, why do you still work for this person? Why are you working for this person? And the adults were like, you don't understand. When you have a job, you just kind of, you have your job. Yeah.
I think maybe that's more of this is the some of that, when you said sinister, really the David Lynchian underbelly of suburban life. And I think that's the thing that I picked up on when I was younger without being able to articulate it.
Just that the darkness.
Yeah. And that it didn't it really felt off to me.
There's a darkness despite everyone touting the virtues of going to church every week, and that was really hard. I think what the hardest thing about growing up in that area was for me, and probably lots of parts of the U.S. and the world, is this idea of good and bad and virtue and right and wrong, that some of it I can jive with, but there was almost like a judgment of one's inner self that was so rigid and damning and finite that I felt like it was in some ways killing my soul. I just it didn't feel natural, it didn't feel sensual, it didn't feel connected. It felt like rules and dusty old rules that came over from Europe, I guess, where a lot of these religions that were part of that area I grew up in, there's Christian religions that were just made at random by some king who's like, I'm going to make this branch of Christianity because I want to be allowed to divorce my wife, or I want to be allowed to have more than one wife, or I want to be allowed. So it was very human-based versions of God that I grew up having a wonderful, what I felt like was a wonderful spiritual connection with a higher power, God, being. And even when I was in church, I knew that was the place where you're supposed to connect to that. But growing up and being judged for very natural things as a teenager developing, you have a sex drive. That's a fact. There's just no place for that in the way religion is conveyed in this country. And it's so sad to shame, not simply LGBTQ folks, but anyone for actually having the biology that they're born into and developing with. It is so, that's where, and it's all the things they say about that's how you control people. It's how you control people. So a lot of my growth has been about connecting to music in a sensual way, connecting to my body through dance, reclaiming my ability to like trust my own instincts and develop my own moral compass. And the thing about telling someone that they're wrong or evil or bad over and over again is that they will believe it. And then they will act in ways that are not in alignment with their own inner guidance. So I'm really I have very strong feelings about everyone's need to like find some way in your life, whether it's like only when you're in your car, you're like, where do you find that place that you can be alone and find out who you are and what's important to you and let it all shake out. You know, there's been like times in my life when I've lived for years where I didn't feel like I was living in alignment or in integrity with my deepest virtues because I felt distanced from my own virtues by having been told like, this is wrong, that's wrong, just being so shaken up. And then having some of the people that were telling me that have like their own, like I was kind of trying to learn from some adults that I was seeing like, well, this doesn't make, like, I don't feel so great about this stuff that you're modeling. And so it was very confusing. But, you know, this is just growing up. This isn't, maybe this is like where my dramatic, that part that used to be pointed out to me as a feeling, you're so dramatic. I mean, I am. I'm kind of a serious, I get serious about this stuff. I can also really laugh, but it sort of depends like who brings what out of me. And it sounds like we have this similar childhood, like ouchy stuff going on. So it can get easy to get very like serious about it. And at this point I'm like feeling great about my ability to assess, it's just, I feel like a connection with my own inner compass that I felt distance from for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, it was the time, it was both the time period, it was both the place we grew up, the time period we grew up in, I think, you know, because I also grew up very, when I say like, oh, I don't know how to process these emotions, because I was not connected to my body. And I had eternal, like, I didn't grow up Catholic, but I had internalized kind of, I think what I will call the Pennsylvania ethos, this kind of like austere, maybe religiosity. I don't know, but like that kind of like, shamefulness around having a body, right?
Shamefulness. Yeah. That's what it is. Shamefulness. Although there's a real, enthusiasm for food. That's funny.
Yes.
It's like,
yes.
Food yes, sex no.
Yeah, I don't know what that was. It's also like we also happened to be teenagers around when the AIDS epidemic was really in its most fierce phase. And so I think there's also this kind of reinforcement that like sex is death. That also happens to be around the same time that you're also like internalizing all this shame. How did you, what was the process of you purging yourself of that or coming to get rid of that shame or be okay in your body?
A lot of experimentation and some really big life mistakes, but just basically using my body. I don't like that word using. I mean, just like getting into it and inhabiting it. I mean, living in New York, I biked a lot. You know, like I connect to my body. I use my body to like bring my groceries home and carry my bike up the steps. And this is, of course, a privilege in having the ability to do that. But I'm saying like we all, regardless of our ability, we can connect to the physical self that we're given. It's a gift, you know, our bodies are gifts. And especially as somebody who wants to make music or art, there are tools. So I don't see like, how does it serve to not be connected to it? Dancing, playing music, making love, making food, just learning how to do things, build things, sewing, tearing things apart, you know, just pushing my boundaries. Like, I think that was something I did a lot in my 20s when I started just having like a lot of spiritual awakenings, kind of one on top of the other. There is this, how much do I need to sleep? When do I need to sleep? How much can I do? How much can I do? And how much can I endure? Do I need Novocaine when I go to the dentist? Just trying everything. And I'm not living in that extreme way now. It's like that inhabiting of my body feels more subtle now. But I think it was just punching to get out, because I felt like I was waiting for so long in the upbringing I had. We went to church, but the church was like dirges. Like when people sang in that church, it wasn't joyful and spontaneous or improvisatory or there was no harmonizing. It was just like, it didn't wake up. It actually pissed me off that's where spirit's supposed to be moving through you, but nothing was moving. It was like everything. It was like it smelled like, it was like mothballs. So yeah, experimenting.
Yeah. Existential experimentation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that learning how to inhabit your body. I like the way you phrase that. Inhabit your body. And also as you're inhabiting it, paying attention to how you're inhabiting it.
Yeah.
As opposed to it just happening, you're moving and your brain is in a car driving past as you're as you're riding your bike or lifting your groceries or something like that. And you're off in somewhere else. It's again, like my therapist was saying, actually pay attention to this stuff and be okay with it and sit with it, as opposed to try to distract yourself from it as much as possible. Most of my life has been distracting myself from life and then being like, that's a shitty way to be an artist. How do you write, something truthful if you have not paid attention to it? And I'm a little bit curious. We're right at the end of the show. I'm a little bit curious. How do you think the way you wrote songs changed as you got more and more used to inhabiting your body?
It absolutely did. My earlier songs were wordier, although I have some pretty wordy ones on the new record, but some of those weren't ever written some years back. But they were more like storytelling words, and I think over time I've gotten a lot more into tone and rhythm, syncopation, and then ruminating on a word, so maybe that word's repeated a lot or there's fewer words. Just feeling how the words feeling if they're true.
I really like that. Diane, thank you for joining me. Like I said before, I love your music, and so
thanks.
I enjoyed talking to you. So thank you. I
never know how to the invite.
I always feel ashamed of complimenting people. I don't know why.
Really?
Yeah.
Ashamed.
Yeah. That there's something I just realized it's because I'm being genuine, because you're seeing a genuine moment.
And that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say that for what you're expressing about not knowing how to do something, I mean, you've made over 450 some shows, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm really, that kind of dedication is meaningful. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's, yeah.
Well, I've learned a lot by doing the show, and
Yeah.
I found it to be a something that I don't think people talk about these kinds of things usually. So
I've enjoyed the episodes of your show that I've heard, and your genuine ability to just say how you are and inside at the moment is, I appreciate it.
Oh, shucks.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
But to continue a project for 10 years is it's a major undertaking. It's a major undertaking. I know that.
Yeah.
So thanks for continuing.
Of course. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.